Councilmember Jose Huizar. I'm joined by Councilmember Zine. This is a meeting of the Audits and Governmental Efficiency Committee. Good afternoon, Mr. Zine.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
And we have two items on the agenda today. What we will do is take them both together since they concern the same matter, and the legislative assistant could help us with that.
Thanks, sir. Item number one is City Controller Report relative to an audit of the city's management of its real estate assets and related matters. This item is also referred to the Arts, Parks, Health and Aging, Energy and Environment, and Information Technology and General Services Committee. And item number two is a motion by Council Members Huizar and Gruel relative to directing the Department of General Services to report on the implementation status of the City Controller's 2003 recommendations and timelines for completion, and directing the GST to work with the various city entities in regard to developing a comprehensive strategy for the management of the city's real estate portfolio.
Thank you. Can we have someone from the Controller's Office, please, come up and make a report on this item? Hi.
Good afternoon. Cynthia Varela with the Controller's Auditing Division.
A brief synopsis of this report and your findings and your audit.
Okay. We'd done a follow-up audit of 3 prior controller reports that were issued in 2003 related to GSD's Asset Management Division. We also considered the impact on those recommendations from the July 2004 report, the Vision and Strategy for the City's Real Estate. We looked at those for on the recommendations that we selected for review. For all 3 reports, there were a total of 25 recommendations. We followed up on the 18 recommendations that were classified as urgent or necessary. Those were our higher risk recommendations. We found progress had been made in the 4.5 years since the reports had been issued. We found in summary that 5 of the 18 recommendations that we reviewed had been implemented. 13 were still in progress. The 3 key asset management issues that remain outstanding really cover 3 broad areas. The first one is that the city does not have an agreed upon comprehensive real estate strategy. GSD has a very comprehensive and thorough office facilities master plan that they prepare. But from our perspective, that doesn't address the needs of a real estate asset management strategy. The Office Facilities Master Plan sets the framework for determining space utilization and office space needs for the city's workforce. In contrast, what we were looking for a real estate strategy, it would encompass how best to use real estate assets, how to obtain the best return on investment for owned real estate assets, possibly by partnering with other public or private entities, identifying the need to acquire or dispose of owned property. And we really see that this real estate strategy needs a consensus from all the stakeholders, from the decision makers, and help provide a framework for making decisions for short-term, intermediate, and long-term goals. We found GSD had drafted some policies related to surplus property and leasing to nonprofits. Those, at the time of the audit, had still not been approved by City Council. GSD needs to build on those efforts and go further to really champion the direction and best solutions for managing the city's real estate. The second area dealt with surplus property sales. What we found is that the number of surplus property sales have not really increased. The process is still cumbersome, and without an overall city vision, sales are handled as individual transactions that can be readily halted. When we did the initial audits, we had found in 2002 that 9 properties had been sold, and it took an average of 2.5 years to complete the sale. In this latest follow-up review, we found over the last 3-year period, an average of 9 properties were sold each year, and it still took 1 to 2 years to complete the sale. To some degree, we found that AMD could shorten the surplus property sales process by ensuring more timely follow-up contacts with other city departments. But the number of surplus sales to really impact the number that's being sold requires a very different city approval process. For example, GSD had attempted to increase the number of sales by obtaining a greater authority to dispose of blocker lots or sliver remnant parcels via blanket council approval. That hadn't received approval, though, from City Council in grouping those types of sales. Also, in October 2006, the mayor's office had identified through GSD over 250 parcels that were surplus and available for sale, but they were not cleared for sale by council offices. So a strategic plan would help prioritize what to do with those surplus properties and how to improve the process and ensure the properties are either sold or held for future benefit based on well-defined criteria. And the third area that we found that was still outstanding dealt with the Citywide Database. That still doesn't exist for all the properties that are within the city. There are still multiple databases within Asset Management Division and the 3 proprietary departments. We noted some incomplete and inaccurate information for GSD's surplus property database. And with the proprietary departments, they're being governed by outside regulations, either at the federal, state, or PUC commissions. And it restricts the city's ability to take any action on the property managed by those departments. But really, we were looking at more information as to what those properties were. And in order to effectively manage the city's real property, it's imperative that there is a comprehensive and accurate inventory. And that's the synopsis of what we found in the follow-up audit of those 3 reports.
Great. Thank you very much. Do you have any immediate questions for the Controller's Office, Mr. Say?
Yeah. Did you find out why it took 2 years to get the completion on the sales? Why would it take that long?
It takes some time to first get the sign-off from the other departments, Housing, Parks and Rec, to make sure that, and those are state regulations, that they give the approval that the properties can't be used by their departments for affordable housing needs or for recreation and parks. There's also needs to go through, trying to think of the other departments, where they have to clear as far as what can be done with the property and getting some of the documents ready that would prepare it for sale.
But for a 2-year period of time?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems a little inefficient, to say the least.
Maybe that's a better
And
question.
there's some things that could be done for follow-up. That's what we found, is that there were some lapses in time in just AMD staff, in some cases, AMD staff not following up timely with the departments to get the clearance and sign off from them so that they could proceed to the next step.
And then also the inventory of the city holdings, that still isn't centralized?
That's correct. It's maintained through different databases.
Is there a plan that someone has to consolidate those?
I think
Better we should invite GSD.
Yeah, GSD can probably respond to that. I know they made attempts to do it, and they did get some information from the proprietary departments after the reports were issued. There were some system incompatibility issues that could not be resolved.
Okay, thank you.
Reginald Jones Sawyer, General Services. On the database question, both, this goes all the way back to Mayor Hahn, had requested that the proprietaries give us the information on surplus property and properties that they have. It's been very difficult getting that from all of the proprietaries.
Why?
They just don't, they have not been able to give it to us. And I can't explain why the
Do
proprietaries.
they have the information?
I believe they do. I believe
So
they
the
do.
resistance is coming from the general managers who are appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the council?
I have no idea why it's taken so long or
No.
a problematic to get it to us. But I do know as far back as the mayor's office had requested in writing that they give us the information
See
and the
what-
data in the form that we want. We haven't gotten that. We would get some information, but it wasn't the kind of information that we could use within our database.
See, what troubles me on this, being a former charter commissioner on the Elected Charter Reform Commission, when we revised this charter, we gave the mayor authority and power over general managers to hire and to fire general managers. And if a department's not performing as expected, the mayor has that authority, and that general manager can come to the council and ask to keep that position. So the intention of the charter was to hold people accountable and responsible. And if a general manager is not following the direction of the mayor, then there's consequences for that general manager, and the mayor has the authority to use that. If general managers aren't complying with this direction, and if we have surplus properties for whatever purpose, and they're not complying with direction, then there are consequences, and the mayor has that tool or that hammer if he wishes to use it. I don't know if the mayor's office even knows, if it dates back to Mayor Hahn, if that's being done, but it offends me as a council member that general managers aren't responsive when a request is put in. I know as the chair of the Personnel Committee, when departments don't respond, we call the general managers in, and they do respond. So this information needs to be gathered, and we shouldn't have to dance around the tree to have it done. And as general services should be the clearinghouse for all of it. So we have it, and the controller's audit obviously showed there's a flaw, and that flaw continues as we sit here today. So somehow we need to do something to correct it.
This committee, through council, the motion, or some other means, will follow up on that, Mr. Zine, and ensure that these department heads respond to the request being made by GSD.
And as soon as you can get the information to us, we have a database ready to receive that information so we can have one database that the controller's office would like to see. We just need to dump that information into our one database.
See, if we're dealing with another city, I can understand resistance, but you're dealing with an entity within the city of Los Angeles. Even though it's a proprietary department, it's still part of the city, and that general manager is appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the council. So there is a hammer to be used if, in fact, they're not complying, whether the general managers know or someone at a lesser level within the department is not complying. But it troubles me that this isn't being done, and there seems to be some resistance that shouldn't be there. It should be a cooperative effort, so we can punch that number in the computer and come up with the information, because the controller does investigative audits. This was a follow-up audit.
Correct.
The initial, and we still don't have compliance. So it came around once, now we still don't have compliance. That's, if the first time I can understand, get them in line, but they're still not in line as of the follow-up audit. So, Mr. Chair, we'll do something
Yeah, we'll
following
follow
this.
up either through administrative means or through a council motion to have the general managers respond, to be responsive. If not, we'll have them come respond to this committee in one form or another.
Excellent.
Mr. Reginald Jones Sawyer, can you give a general response to the controller's findings?
I think overall, General Services agrees with the recommendations from the Controller's Office, and we swiftly started to implement everything that's on there. I think where we kind of, if I'm going to cut to the laser, to the point of it, where we respectfully disagree with the Controller's Office, where we've kind of, and we also enlighten one another, and I think when you read the report, there's some things in there that weren't shared in the first report that are shared now. There's like 3 areas. There's a strategic plan. There's this question of General Services' lack of authority or power that it possesses over processes, approval, and decision-making. And then finally, where the Controller's Office has said that we partially implemented, we think we fully implemented. I'll go into where we think a discrepancy is. On a strategic plan, we believe this document here is our strategic plan. This document, which was written in 1995, served to help us make decision-making for the last 10, 13 years. It's the basis for the neighborhood city hall plans, where we've now have a West Valley neighborhood city hall, a Boyle Heights city hall, a neighborhood city hall, and others. There's the nonprofit policy sprung out of that. There's a lot of different things that we now are engaged in that we wouldn't have had before. Even the new buildings that we have now were based on the premise of lease versus buy policy and a lot of other things that I could go into great detail. But the most important thing is there was a plan, whether you want to call it a strategic plan or a master plan. There was a plan in place, and we've been following it ever since.
Now-
Since then, I do want to say we've updated that plan, and it is now a strategic plan, more in line with what the Controller's Office is looking for as far as vision, as far as coming up with more sweeping things that we need to do. This should be published or brought before council, hopefully by the beginning of October, so that you can officially approve it. One of the major concerns that the Controller's Office has is that General Services do put forth a lot of policies, a lot of procedures, and a lot of things that we think the city should be guided by in a real estate process, but have not been approved by the council. And so this should incorporate a lot of, if not all, a lot of our policies so that we can move forward with a comprehensive policy, which is what the Controller's Office wants, that ultimately is approved by the mayor and council, so they will have more punch into it as far as when we go out and try to get things done.
Has the Controller's Office reviewed this new plan, strategic plan?
No, we haven't published it yet.
No, our report was based on the master plan that was in existence at that time.
Okay.
And we will make sure that they get a copy of it as soon as it's ready to be published. Two, I think a lot of people thought the General Services had a lot of authority over getting things done, whether it's leases, surplus property, acquisitions of property. We make recommendations to mayor and council. Ultimately, mayor and council makes a decision whether or not we move forward with a sale of a surplus property or not. A lot of times we will move forward with the sale of surplus property and it will get pulled by a council person. And a lot of people think that the delays in surplus property is not only because of what goes on with my staff, and sometimes my staff may miss something, but it's rare, and we've corrected those. But many times, as far as the process is, there's building and safety that needs to sign off, Bureau of Engineering, planning, mayor, council, CAO sometimes have to write a report, and each of those have to do their own input before we can ultimately sell a piece of property. And so that creates a lot of delays, sometimes a year, and in some cases may even delay it 2 years if there's a lot of analysis that needs to be done. And so, in essence, a lot of people believe that General Services has the capability to make other departments and other entities move quicker or faster. We have no jurisdiction over CAO to make them get a report out faster, or BOE to get a report out faster. It takes as long as it takes. And then finally, the discussion about partial versus full. I think, again, if you look at one of the recommendations that the controller made was for us to seek broader authority in conjunction with redesign of its processes, specifically starting with surplus property. I think the controller's office mentioned earlier that we did try to go ahead and get broader authority to sell surplus property, because if we only had 2 steps, which would be to sell the property and then getting approval from the decision makers, if the decision maker takes 2 years to make a decision on what to do with that piece of property, it takes us 2 years. If it takes them 5 years, it takes us 5 years. If it only takes us one step, that's just the way it is. And a lot of the decision makers may want to use it for housing, for senior center, or they just want to tear down an old city parcel to turn into rec and parks facilities. Well, those things don't happen overnight. You have to get funding, you have to do design, and things of that nature. So when General Service tried to seek broader control so that we could maybe do a lot of this stuff in-house so we can get things done quicker, which is what I believe the Controller's Office would like to see, it has not met with a lot of, it's met with some resistance, because not many people want to give up the control over their own parcels in their own respective council districts. And then the other...
On that, the Controller's Office, you mentioned there were a number of obstacles and very bureaucratic, and the response from GSD is that they don't have authority or jurisdiction to move this process any faster than what it is now. Any thoughts on that?
Well, there are steps in the process that we pointed out in the report that could require better follow-up on AMD's side, but it is true, they have to get clearances from various departments, and you can establish timelines for them to respond. Also, if the staff would follow up timely, it would shorten some of the time frame. Whether it would cut it down substantially, I can't say for sure. And I think there were also instances where there were some delays that were explained by staff, but they weren't documented in the file. So it's difficult to say if a 3-month delay is due to a property not being vacated, whether that was in fact the case.
Okay. So I am, for one, I personally very reluctant to give up public property. And I like the checks and balances. I think we should have the checks and balances. And a lot of real estate people would tell you sometimes they sit on property because they don't see value of that property at this time, but maybe in the future. And, but it also relates now to the strategic planning that we don't have right now, because if that is kind of our thinking, we should let that be known, or there's other things that go into why we may or may not be moving on property as quickly. So at one level, I like the checks and balances. At another, in the controller's report, have we identified those items which you think are, other than being transparent and public and having that checks and balances in place, items that you identified that we could kind of cut down if there's this process we have in place?
Well, I think it's some of the things that AMD tried to put through, which, if you looked at maybe getting more of a single council authority for some of these smaller parcels, rather than on a transaction basis. And that seemed to be one of the things that I think when the consulting report was done on vision and strategy, the big thing that came out on it was that real estate transactions were being processed, on a transaction by transaction basis rather than taking this broader view on it. So if we were to look at how would you make the process more efficient for some of these sliver or remnant parcels, maybe getting a blanket authority to do 10 of those properties if those have been identified, rather than going for each 10, going through the entire process of going through all of the council approval. But that's for that type of property.
Yeah.
And in the strategic plan that we've written, we're looking at bundling them kind of in those categories, either properties that you can sell, properties that you would land bank and hopefully, look at future use, properties that you can immediately develop, whether it's housing, whether it's business efforts, and we've looked at each of the parcels, and we have a pretty good idea how we could bundle them, but we would then go and present that idea to each council person, and she's exactly right. If we can bundle them, then we can just basically take them all off the surplus property list and have them identified for a specific purpose. Even land banking is a specific purpose. Then we can get money for to protect the property, to fence it in, knowing that we're just sitting on it for a specific purpose, which is, I think, where most of the council people and the mayor and what the controller's office ultimately would like to see.
And I think it's going to be very helpful for us, because when we went through the budget process, there was this mentality that we should just sell all this surplus property. We probably do have some property that we could sell to help us fill our needs, our deficit, but at the same time, if we would identify some of that property that we're land banking it and explain the reasons why, it would stop this fervor of let's just sell the property we have for that we may need in the future for some other purpose.
And we would need to be in close consultation with each council person, because you have a better understanding of what's going on in your district as far as community needs too, which we may not have a good grasp of.
Do you ever work with the neighborhood councils?
No, not directly.
Because they have an input in that too. What happens to the surplus property? Since our neighborhood councils are part of that, whether it's going to be a community center or housing or retail or whatever.
Right. When it goes to that process, but they're not, if the council and mayor decides to sell, they're not necessarily in that particular part of the process.
Should be.
Then that's another.
If we want to empower neighborhood councils, why would we exclude them from something where they may have an idea what they want with that old fire station?
Well, that's another
Fire
step.
station that's currently in existence on Burbank Boulevard, just north of Ventura Boulevard, on the west side of the street. The weeds are growing. It's starting to look terrible, and the neighbors are complaining. It's not in my district, but the neighbors are complaining, why isn't something happening to this fire station, which is abandoned. They built a new one, surplus. What they're going to do with it, I don't know. Meanwhile, it's being neglected. No one's maintaining the vegetation. It's just like an eyesore. You have a residence that's in foreclosure. I think a law was passed that the mortgage company has to maintain the property. Here we have a fire station that is no longer in use, and we're neglecting it, which then tears down the neighborhood.
Correct.
The neighborhood council would be concerned about that, so
And that would
what
be
they do with it.
would be great. Then we could come back every year to get funding to take care of all of those properties that we're going to land bank, because ultimately, you have to mow the lawn, you have to make sure no vagrants are there, you have to put the security in the fence, make sure no one's tearing out the copper pipes. I mean, there's a lot to
That's right.
just letting a piece of property sit.
Well, what happens is the city moves out of that particular parcel, and it's still owned by the city, but they're neglecting it. So you may want to look into that one, Balboa north of Ventura
I
Boulevard.
know exactly where it is. I took a tour the other day.
There you go. Was it looking shabby?
It needs a little work.
Okay.
On the Citywide Database, GSD, what are your thoughts on that?
We have a database ready to have any information downloaded into it. As soon as, and if we can get it in the format that is compatible with our system, we could literally have one database done in a relatively short period of time, and it's done.
That's what we need to follow up on.
Is that the issue you identified, Controller? It's just, I mean, with that, is it the technology? Is it, I mean, the response from GSD is that we're not getting any response from the department. Now, would that
Well, that's what we had found when we did the follow-up review, is that they had gotten some information early on. It had been some time, though, since I think any of it had been updated. So we're not sure if there's any changes since that initial sharing of data. So there would have to be a process to make sure that any changes to that database, you know, it's continually updated. But what had prevented them from being fully compliant in that recommendation is that the information wasn't completely captured. So I guess it was not in the format that was suitable for their system.
I see two outstanding issues here. One is to assure that the general managers are responsive to GSD and the information we need to maintain that citywide database of properties. Second is the strategic plan by GSD will be, it's out already, it's available now, right? But it will be.
This is the final draft, and
Final draft, okay.
hopefully our general manager signs off by the beginning of October.
We're going to, we still have a lot more questioning, but just my general thought right now is to continue this item to allow us to review that plan, and hopefully the controller will give us some input as to if that's okay with the controller's office, to see if that satisfied some of the concerns from the audits. And secondly, we're going to follow up with the general managers to see what we can do to have them be more responsive to GSD in the interim between now and the time we bring back these two items in, let's say, mid-October or so. Well, we would need, you plan to bring the strategic plan to full council by October, you said?
To the Municipal Facilities Committee is the one that we usually go through first, and they're a clearinghouse before we get to council committees.
Okay, we'll coordinate it to have the audits committee have some review of this before it gets to council at some point.
Yes, and then it would go to you.
Okay. Mr. Zine, anything else? Well, thank you all very much for your work on this. Appreciate it. So that's anything else, Mr. Villanueva?
That's all, Mr. Chair. So for both items, it will be continued.
Both items will be continued to a date to be determined, and we're going to coordinate to have them heard before the GSD's visioning plan, strategic plan on this goes to full council. Thank you, Mr. Villanueva. You know, there's a town called Villanueva in my home state of Zacatecas. Wow. Yeah. All right, thank you very much. Little trivia. Mr. Zine's hiding my shoes again.